Welcome our next speaker, Kelly Newton. Kelly is from Boston Consulting Group. She's the Managing Director and Partner here in New Zealand and brings over 20 years of experience in strategic advisory, transformation and leadership. And Kelly's launched a BCG investigation into the future of New Zealand Inc., outlining strategic opportunities for New Zealand to lead in high-value, globally competitive sectors. So a nice connection here to some of the things that Shamabil's just been talking about. Kelly is a commentator on New Zealand business and economic issues in the media and is regarded as a thought leader on the challenges and the opportunities that are shaping this country's public and private sectors. So please welcome Kelly Newton. So large arrow there.
Great. Thank you. Is this good? Okay. Kia ora, everyone. It's wonderful to be here today. And I think for me being here, it's really great to be here in front of you with the people that actually protect a lot of the reputation that we have around food here in New Zealand. Today, I want to expand the aperture a little bit. It'll be narrower than what Shamabil just talked about, but talk a bit about how food safety, research, and science all connect with some of our broader future here in New Zealand. And this conversation is going to be based around two different things that we published as BCG earlier this year. One is around the future of New Zealand Inc. and what we'll be known for in 2050. And then the second is about growing our advantage in AgTech. And so both of those are kind of thinking about what are the things that we need to do to get there and to achieve a vision for New Zealand. And so I'd welcome comments either now or in the breaks around kind of what your reactions are to some of that vision. So before we get into some of the specifics, I wanted to share a little bit of a story about why did I think that this would be interesting to do and how we got there. So I have been working with BCG for a long time. And I moved to New Zealand just under 2 years ago. My husband is a Kiwi, but I had actually not lived here in New Zealand before. So I'd been working with BCG abroad. But as I came here, I started asking the question of what are we good at here in New Zealand? What are we known for? And a lot of people do talk about the agriculture industry and that being something that we're known for, or tourism. A lot of people talk about ingenuity and the innovation that we have here. But I said, okay, great. So we're good at innovation, but what kind of innovation? And there were lots of fingers pointing to lots of different things around innovation and things that are embedded into the culture here in New Zealand. But it wasn't necessarily connected to something where we could achieve the scale. So one of Shamabil's graphs was showing productivity, and productivity is not necessarily moving in the right direction for New Zealand. And one of the things that you need for productivity is to be good at something and then continuing to build upon that. And so I think the other thing that I heard when I said, well, why don't we have things that we're kind of good at, is they said, well, we don't like to pick winners and losers. And I said, okay, but we also have limited resources within New Zealand, and any country has limited resources. And so we do need to place some strategic bets so that we are placing bets on things that we think could be successful and then building upon that and kind of starting that flywheel in motion. So anyway, I asked the question about kind of what could we be known for? And because I think that that's what helps to actually lift some of the economy. So I have maybe not been here at a time when New Zealand was firing on all cylinders. But how do we kind of get out of a rut? And so one of the areas that, if you kind of look over time, we've played different roles. So again, in some of the things that Shamabil showed, you saw the things that we've exported over time, the role that we've played in exporting to England. You've also seen, as we kind of went through our own adding more high-skilled jobs as we evolved over time, but we are known for the tourism, we're known for some agriculture, but where are we actually going to grow as the fundamental question? And so I would actually say that there's a real opportunity for us to look at AgTech as one of those sectors. And so the definition of AgTech is quite broad. And so I wanted to put up here one definition as a suggestion on what that includes. But it's really anything on how we grow food, how we farm, harvest, produce, package. Um, and it's one of the most immediate opportunities for New Zealand. And one of the reasons for that is that we look at what's the size of the opportunity globally, what's the size of the market, how fast is it growing, and what is some of our advantage in that. And so for New Zealand, it's agri-tech globally is actually a very large market. It's going through a lot of growth. It's growing very quickly. And we do punch above our weight today. And so there's a question about how do we continue to get a larger share of some of that growth going forward. It's definitely not saying that agriculture is changing here in New Zealand in terms of it being a major source of what we export, but in terms of where we see the growth going forward, more of that would likely come from the ag tech sector. And so why do I think, hopefully I'm preaching to the choir a little bit about why New Zealand would be really good at this, but there's an incredibly strong brand around agriculture, sustainability, the cultural connection to the land. So I think all of that brings it in as a really strong advantage for New Zealand. The other is we do have some key elements of the ecosystem. So again, Shamobeel talked about kind of the importance of these structures that are in place and how they play together. And an ecosystem is one of those, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into that. I think there's also an opportunity with kind of where we are. We are far away, but we do actually have a good variety of land here in New Zealand to be able to be that test bed for different technologies that are developed or for others to test some of that and be a test bed here in New Zealand. And so all of those give us some enduring competitive advantage when we look at how New Zealand is positioned relative to other countries. So there's kind of what could be some of the vision for where we're going. I think this is one suggestion of what that vision could be, because I think that right now there are lots of these components that are doing quite well, but they're not necessarily connected to a vision of where we could be in the future. And so if you think about where could we be in 2050, if you imagine that we are a global powerhouse in agri-tech, and what might we be able to do? Well, we would have world leading research that's being done. We would be recognized as having that research here. We would be attracting the investment around the research. Companies would be commissioning a lot of that research. We would be retaining the talent here in New Zealand. So I know that the brain drain is one of the concerns that people have. One of the ways to retain that talent is to make sure that we're the best place to do it. And so today you do attract some scientists to certain parts of New Zealand because they know that that's the best place to do research in their field. But how do you become more of that destination across agri-tech, and maybe not just in some of the narrow places where that happens today? I think also thinking about technologies that could apply not just within New Zealand, but outside of New Zealand. So today we do develop a lot of technologies that apply for the way that we do dairy, the way that we raise sheep, but we don't necessarily think about, are there other things that we could develop that might solve problems that are outside of New Zealand? And I think that's an opportunity for us with the agri-tech sector as that continues to grow. So thinking about ecosystems, they have 7 different components. And so at the center is an orchestrator, and that orchestrator helps to bring together those different pieces. And I think that's one area here in New Zealand where we have a bit of opportunity. But around that, you have the universities. So are the universities both funded, but also focused on what areas would really move the needle and connected to some of that economic opportunity? Another one is industry. So do we have some of the companies, larger companies that create some of that anchor demand that are based here in New Zealand? Do we have Maori businesses and iwi that are also part of that ecosystem, and are we taking into account the way that they operate, the values that they have, and bringing that as part of the whole? Startups and incubators. So are there startups that are interested in being based here and developing some of that innovation and commercializing the technologies that are being developed? Investors. So those that can invest in some of these technologies, that could be both attracting foreign investment, but also that investment here within New Zealand. The research institutions that are sometimes pushing the envelope. It may not be immediately obvious what some of the commercial application might be, but pushing the limits of the research. So having all of those components also with a common vision of where we want to get to is something that some other developed economies have done quite well. So a couple examples, and I know that some of you in this room actually may have highlighted one of these for me in terms of being quite leading, but I think the Netherlands and Singapore, I'm sure that some of you are very familiar with one or both of these in terms of the things that they've done, but they've done a great job of setting up the ecosystem. And so I think first with the Netherlands, they have the Food Valley as the orchestrator for a lot of their ecosystem that works across both Wageningen in terms of the university ecosystem, but bringing together different businesses, the regulation, as well as creating kind of a single hub for those that are interested in investing to know and direct them where to go. And so that's just one example. The other is Singapore. And so Singapore is facing a quite different challenge in terms of being very limited by the land area that they have available, but they also have a vision of where they want to be. They have their 30 and 30. So they want to have 30% of their food produced within Singapore by 2030. And so that then requires quite a bit of technology to think about how would we grow food in a much different way. And so given that focus, the timeline, they have then attracted investment to help them figure out how they're going to get there. They have a lot of money going into research. And they also have Food Plant, which is a small batch center where those startups can, as well as developed companies, but it's kind of like a rent per hour almost type of setup, where you can go in without investing all of the capital that would be required. But if you're a startup, you're an established business, you can use that facility to do some small batch testing. And so that's just one example of how they're able to bring together some of those different components around a common goal. So how are we doing as New Zealand? So in thinking about the strength of our ecosystem here in New Zealand, I think that there are some great components, and I think it's important for us to talk about all of those great things because I also probably don't watch the news as frequently here because it's not a rosy picture. And there are some great things that we're doing, but there are also some big gaps and opportunities for us to address. So across the ecosystem, obviously we have some larger companies that are within the ag sector. So companies like Synlait or Fonterra, are great to have here in New Zealand, and they provide some of that anchor demand, as I mentioned. We also do have a fairly vibrant startup and incubator kind of community. I know everyone loves to talk about Halter. I don't know if I can still count them in the startup part of the ecosystem or if they're starting to move elsewhere. But I also think, like, how many more Halters could there be with a more coordinated ecosystem? So I think it's great that they've been so successful, but how do you create more of them? In terms of some of the opportunities I had mentioned around the orchestrator, that's definitely one where how can we make it easy for all of these other pieces to find and connect with the right pieces? I enjoy going to field days. In my first year, I went to field days and I said, okay, if I were an ag startup, where would I want to be based here in New Zealand? Or where should I go? And I got a very puzzled look from the person that I was talking to at Field Days. And let's just say they're someone that should definitely know. They were someone that was sitting there at, like, kind of in the innovation tent. And I asked this question and they looked at me very puzzled, and they're like, well, you can go anywhere. I was like, no, but like, if I want to be where the action is happening, where would I go? And there wasn't kind of one place where they would say, it's really clear that if this is what you want to do, this is where to go. And I think that that's part of the role of the orchestrator, of being able to help direct people, whether they're investors, they're people interested in starting businesses, or they're looking for a technology that's going to complement what they do. That orchestrator could help. I think the other example would be, I was there and Bavonic, that's talking about their mastitis technology, which is really great. There's another company that I forget what their name is, but they're the ones that once you know that your cow has some kind of mastitis, that says, well, here's what you should do to treat it. And I was amazed. They're sitting next to each other at Field Days, but they don't go to market together. They actually go to market very separately. And I was very surprised at that, because I said, well, if you're a farmer and you know that your cow, you need to test your cow for mastitis, well, then you probably need to know, and you would be interested in treating them as well. And so why wouldn't you actually go to market together? And I think that that's, again, where an orchestrator could help those two say, hey, this would actually save both of us money. We could grow our market more efficiently. And we could not just, you don't want to think about just competing here within New Zealand, but more about how are we successful outside of New Zealand. So still a little bit of a way to go, but really promising in terms of what we can do. And so this is important because you want to create this flywheel. It's not a physical flywheel, it's a business flywheel. But how do you align around the things that are important and have a shared vision, but then actually start to take action on that vision, generate momentum with some of the early wins, so other people want to get on board? How do you scale that up to actually generate the economic growth and then build competitive advantage? And it's really reinforcing that cycle. And I would argue that you want to pick a couple of these areas that you're going to go deep in, and then you can spin off and do other things as well. But how do we get deeper in what we're doing? Then there's kind of, what's the role that you play? So I think it's really important, because all of this around AgTech is actually based on some of that brand that New Zealand has outside of New Zealand. And so the trust that others place in New Zealand, the sustainability that we have, and the halo effect of that outside of New Zealand, and also some of the cultural values that we have within New Zealand make us unique, but also need to be protected so that we can attract that interest, attract the premiums, attract some of the talent here to New Zealand on an ongoing basis. So there's a vision for kind of where we can be in 2030. And if you think about, because 2050 is really far. And so I'm going to lose people if I just talk about 2050. But if you think about 2030 and said, okay, we're going to more than double the investment that we have in AgTech, that would be a really good place to start. And I think that that's specific enough for us to say, okay, what things would need to happen for us to double that investment? And having a good orchestrator would be a big part of that. How do we scale more of the ventures that we have here in New Zealand beyond New Zealand? So thinking about the opportunities to export is really important for us to continue to grow and also achieve some scale. I think there's a big one around unlocking innovation at universities. So one of the things that I heard was that it's actually quite challenging if you have a venture and you want to start it up. I think Massey has done some things to improve this, but they talked about several years ago, if you're taking 30% of a venture that started up at a university, not only is that limiting in just thinking about starting up a venture and automatically giving over that much of your company, but that makes you actually quite uncompetitive on a global stage. And so the talent that wants to commercialize their technology, they're going to go somewhere else to do it. And so how do we actually help to unlock and support that here in New Zealand? The next is cultivating that next generation of talent. I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of focusing more on STEM education, and also, I don't know, you'll have to forgive me as an American and don't read into other views, but like, how do you kind of make AgriTech cool again? It is something that I think is coming back. And if you see some young people, they're getting really into it, but I'm not sure that they're yet seeing that potential before they close off some of those doors, because people are making choices on classwork that they take even in high school. And I would hate for them to get to university and say, oh, I didn't know I needed to take math to help advance this. And then I think that the last one is, how do we embed some of the Maori cultural values in how we think about it? Because I think it's actually quite special how the values that we have, and the kaiti katanga, that is just the broad thinking about a much different timeline, the guardianship that we have of the land. That's something that's quite special. And I think if you could combine that with some of the newer technologies, then, you know, that could just be something really unique for New Zealand. So just a few things to think about where we could be in 5 years. So I think just to wrap up, I think it's really important. It's not about choosing between food and technology going forward. It's how do we bring both of those together and actually place a bet on ag tech going forward. And so I just want to thank all of you. I know that you'll spend the rest of the day thinking about how you might do that as guardians of the food system here in New Zealand. So thank you.